My name is Cheryl. I'm 62 years old, and I've seen a lot in this life. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on the eve of my son's wedding. Tell me something. What would you do if you found out that your husband, the man with whom you shared a lifetime, was in the arms of your own child's future wife, inside your home? I know, it seems too absurd to be true, but when I say that I saw it with my own eyes, and it wasn't just what I saw, it was what I found out later, because on that day, the world that took me decades to build began to crumble, brick by brick, right before my eyes. Maybe you're here trying to understand how betrayal like this can happen within a family. Maybe you've also felt that tightness in your chest, that intuition that screams, even when everyone pretends that everything is fine. I understand. I felt it. But if you stay here with me, I'll tell you everything. From the subtle signs to the revelation that changed my life and my son's forever. Because when the truth came out, there was no stone left unturned. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. It has an image that still burns in my eyes today, as if it had been engraved with iron. I entered the room to get an ornament for the altar and I saw my husband with my son's fiancée, that girl I welcomed as a daughter, who I helped choose the dress, who I defended when everyone was suspicious. It was in the arms of the man with whom I had slept for 25 years. But the worst was not even that. What my son told me later made the ground disappear from my feet, and that night, a few hours before the ceremony, I had to decide, destroy everything there. Or did he let time itself do justice before everyone? If you've come this far, it's because, perhaps, somewhere in there, you've also felt the pain of seeing love turn into deception. So before I continue this difficult memory, if this kind of truth touches you, if you've ever cried quietly for something that no one would believe, give me your company. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay here with me. Because today, I'll tell you everything. I woke up before the sun that day. The sky was still dark. The silence of the house embraced me like a lament. It was the morning of my son's wedding, a date that was supposed to be a party, but my chest was already carrying a sadness that I couldn't explain. I stood up slowly, as if carrying stones on his shoulders. I went to the kitchen, but before turning on the coffee, I went through the garden. The arch with the flowers was almost ready. I had helped to decorate it myself. White hydrangeas, blue roses, satin ribbons, every detail chosen with heart. I ran my hand over the petals still wet with dew. And there, alone in that garden, I felt like a ghost inside the house itself. I did everything for that family. I did too much. And suddenly, it seemed like I was just a shadow. I remembered the night spent paying the bills when Franklin said that the office was down. I remembered when Elijah had pneumonia and I was awake for 3 days in the hospital, while Franklin was on a business trip. I remembered me as a young man, with my hands cracked from washing so much, trying to keep everything standing. The water began to boil in the coffee maker. That smell of fresh coffee that always gave me strength that morning only made me want to cry. But I didn't cry. I had already learned that tears, after a certain age, only dry up inside. I sat at the table, still silent, when I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs. Elijah, my son, the boy I raised with so much love, who I taught to respect women, who I cradled in my arms while singing softly for sleep to come. He stopped at the kitchen door with red eyes, as if he hadn't slept either, and he said, "Mom, do you think Madison really loves me?" It was like taking a beating. I didn't expect that. I took a deep breath, held the cup with both hands so I wouldn't tremble. "Why that question, son?" He lowered his eyes. He stirred the coffee slowly, as if he didn't want to look at me. "I don't know. Just wanted to hear from you." And then I realized. He knew something. Or maybe he did, as I did. As if the heart warned before the truth appeared. My mother's instinct screamed inside. But I couldn't run. I couldn't press. I could only offer my most sincere look and say, "Real love doesn't have to hide anything, my son. If there is any doubt, it is because something is wrong." He nodded, but said nothing more. He got up and left, saying he was going to run in the park to clear his head. I stood there, alone again, with the coffee cooling on the table and a throbbing pain in my chest. You know, there are times in life when everything around us remains the same. The house, the furniture, the cutlery and the drainer. But inside us, something has already started to die. And the worst part is that no one sees it. We smile in front of others, serve coffee, arrange flowers, and inside, it's in pieces. At this point, allow me to pause and ask, have you ever felt it? That feeling of being surrounded by people, but completely alone. If you've experienced something like this, write here in the comments with a word that represents you at that moment. It can be, it touched me, I've lived it, it's true, or simply, what a strength. I'm going to read each one as if they were letters that life sends me back. I went back to the garden. I took the pruning shears and started to cut some dry leaves that I didn't even need to touch, just to have somewhere to unload that anguish. And it was at that time that I heard voices. Franklin talking on the phone, laughing. He spoke softly, but a louder laugh escaped. A laugh I hadn't heard from him in a long time. A laugh that wasn't for me. In that instant, something inside me changed. The doubt became suspicious, and the suspicion, it became preparation. Because as much as we pretend not to see, the heart of a betrayed woman begins to scream before the eyes see. And my heart, I was already on alert, but I still didn't know what was coming. I still didn't know what I would see, nor what my son would tell me that very afternoon. Because what happened next, it took me out from under my feet. Can you imagine what he revealed? The morning dragged on, as if time was waiting for something to happen. The house was full of people coming and going, preparations everywhere, but I could only pay attention to the small details, the gestures, the looks, the unsaid. Around 9, Madison arrived. She wore a light, clear dress, loose hair, discreet makeup. She had a briefcase in her hands and said she needed to review the vows with Elijah, but it was Franklin who received it at the door. And what I saw there, I couldn't pretend. He greeted her with too much enthusiasm. He touched her back with a long caress, as if he was forgetting that I, his wife, was inside, looking out the kitchen window. It wasn't just the touch, it was the way they looked at each other. One more second of eye contact, a half-contained smile, like two accomplices trying to disguise a secret. I froze. I froze there, with my hand on the tap, and my heart squeezing in a way that left me breathless for a few seconds. Before I could react, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Elijah, with the same tired expression as earlier, stood next to me and watched the scene in silence. He saw it too. His presence at that moment gave me a strange strength, as if I was no longer alone inside that nightmare. We stood there, both of us looking out the window in silence, until he whispered, almost as if he didn't want to believe what he said, "There's something wrong." I didn't answer. I just touched my hand to his, which was cold, sweaty, and that touch between mother and son. It was the first pact, a mute pact of vigilance. From then on, we knew we needed to open our eyes, because what was in front of us was no longer a ceremony. It was a staging. Madison entered the house as if nothing had happened. He greeted the guests, praised the decoration, took a photo with the bridesmaids. I watched her the whole time, so at ease, so confident, so sure of the role she played. And Franklin, he floated around her like a silly teenager. He laughed too loudly, offered things, opened doors. The man who, with me, barely opened his mouth, now seemed to be reborn around that girl. Every gesture of his wounded me like an invisible splinter getting under my skin. Over lunch, Elijah and I exchanged glances. The food seemed tasteless. The conversations were a distant noise. I faked smiles, but my body was on alert. And for the first time in my life, I looked at my son and realized that he was ready to face truths with me. He was no longer that boy I protected with so much zeal. He was a man who, like me, was about to have his heart torn apart. After the meal, while everyone was distracted by rehearsals and decor adjustments, Elijah pulled me discreetly to the back porch. The sun was beating down weakly there, the trees swaying in the light spring wind. It was there that he told me, "Mom, there's one thing you need to see, but he hasn't shown anything yet." He just said that, with teary eyes and trembling chin. I felt my stomach turn. That was the warning, that which we feel when pain is knocking on the door, but has not yet entered. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. From that moment on, there was no turning back. The truth was coming. And what my son was going to show me, it was going to change everything. Would you be ready to see what your own son has discovered about the man you've loved all your life? I still remember how the wind blew at that moment, as if nature itself knew that something horrible was about to happen. I was in the garden, pretending to tidy up some dry foliage near the archway, but I was actually watching. There was something in their posture, something that didn't leave me alone. The plan of the house allowed you to see part of the main room through the side window. I approached in silence, hidden among the bushes. It was as if something pushed me there, forcing me to see with my own eyes what my heart already knew. And that's when I saw it. Franklin and Madison, alone, laughing, talking quietly. She was sitting on the couch, he standing in front of her, his body leaning over. A strange, intimate atmosphere. He reached out, touched her hair, took a strand of her face. She smiled and put her hand on his leg. The conversation turned to silence, and then they kissed. That kind of kiss that leaves no doubt. A kiss that was not that of father and daughter-in-law. A kiss full of desire, of certainty, of custom. My world stopped. The heart, the time, the body, everything froze. I leaned on a dry branch so I wouldn't fall. His mouth is dry, his legs are limp, his blood is running like a knife. It was true. It was all true. My husband, my son's fiancé, inside my house, on my boy's wedding day. And it was at that moment, when I was about to invade that room and scream, that my eyes met another look. At the top of the stairs, standing in shock, was Elijah. He saw it too. He saw it all. And our eyes met. There was no screaming, no despair, just absolute silence. His pain was mine. His betrayal was also mine. He didn't run down. He descended slowly, as if each step was a sentence. He met me at the back of the house, behind the garden. And when he spoke, his voice was no longer the same. "Mom, that didn't start today. I already knew." That sentence fell like a stone in my chest. What do you mean he already knew? What do you mean he carried it quietly? I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I could only hear. And he continued. He said he saw strange messages weeks ago, that he caught Franklin lying about meetings and travel. He said he even confronted Madison, and she cried, swore love, said she was confused. And he wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe so much that he preferred to ignore the evidence. But now, after that kiss, there was no way to pretend anymore. The two of us there, under the blue sky and a pain that has no name, realized that nothing was as it seemed. And the wedding, the guests, the whole family that was already on the way, it was like living inside a nightmare dressed as a party. But the worst part was yet to come, because what Elijah decided to show me next, it was going to open an even deeper hole inside the truth. Would you be ready to see what a son discovered when he decided to investigate his own fiancée and his own father? Elijah took an envelope from his coat pocket, one of those browns, shabby at the ends. His hands trembled a little, but his eyes were steady, as if he had cried everything he had to cry. He handed me the envelope without saying anything, and I, for a moment, hesitated. My heart felt like it wanted to jump out of my chest. When I opened it, I saw dozens of printed photos. In all of them, Franklin and Madison, in motels on the road, at dinners, in airport queues, laughing as a couple. And it wasn't just that. There were also card statements, reservations in a false name, proof of very expensive gifts, a diamond bracelet, a weekend at a resort in Asheville, $1,000 dinners in Charleston, all paid for with our money, with the money from our house, from our retirement, from my savings. I flipped the photos one by one. It was as if each image tore off a piece of me. And they were not recent things. Madison had been with Franklin for more than a year of lies inside my house, of fake hugs, laughing at the dinner table. Franklin said he was at a conference, that he was going to Nashville, that he was going to solve pending issues with old clients. I believed it, because deep down, I trusted the one I loved. But it wasn't love he had for me. It was convenience. It was cowardice. Elijah, his eyes moist, told me that he couldn't stand the doubt anymore. He hired a private investigator 3 months earlier, when he saw a message from Madison flashing on Franklin's cell phone screen. A message without a name, but with a heart. A nostalgia for yesterday. He said he didn't have the courage to tell me before, because he still wanted to believe that it was all a misunderstanding. But after the photos, he knew it was real. I stood there with the envelope in my lap, my body cold. Every lie Franklin told me over the years has come back like a movie. The birthdays he forgot, the Christmases he spent on duty, the credit cards blocked by mistake. I played his lie. I financed my own humiliation. With my savings, with my blind faith, with my years of silence. I never imagined that I would sustain, with the sweat of my entire life, the romance between my husband and the woman who would enter the altar with my son in a white veil. I didn't cry. Not at that moment. It was as if my body didn't allow any more tears. But something inside me broke for good. It wasn't just the wedding. It was the whole story. The past, the present, even the future I dreamed of. All contaminated by a dirty, low, cruel lie. And I say this by opening my heart here, with all the courage that this story requires of me. If you're still here listening to me, following this piece of life that was torn in front of me, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not out of vanity. It's just that I still have a lot of things in store to tell you. Stories that, like this one, were born in silence and needed time to become a voice. That late morning, after seeing all that, I sat on the edge of the bed, hugged that envelope as if it were a pillow and thought, what do I do with this truth? Yell? Do I expel them both? Do I cancel the wedding? Do I call the police? But no. I took a deep breath, and there, in that silence, a word formed inside me. Justice. I didn't want revenge. He didn't want a scandal. I wanted them to taste their own rot, without me having to get dirty. I wanted the world to see who they were, without me losing my dignity. And that's when I started to think, if they had the courage to destroy me from behind, I would have the courage to show everything from the front, but in my own way, in my time, with elegance, with force, with truth. The question now was, how to reveal everything, without getting lost in the middle of it. And it was my son who gave me the first clue, because what he said soon after completely changed the course of history. Can you believe there were still more? Because what I found out later, it was much bigger than a betrayal. It was a whole blow, and it involved a 15-year-old girl, a daughter, that it wasn't mine, but who also carried my husband's blood. That afternoon, when Elijah left the room and left me alone with that envelope and that devastating truth, I sat on the edge of the bed as if waiting for an earthquake, but there was no noise. Memory came, and it was crueler than any scream. Because suddenly my head started to pull memories that had been quiet for decades, and all of them now seemed like lies. I remembered the first time Franklin traveled for work. Elijah was only 5 years old and had a fever. I spent the whole night with him on my lap, praying for his fever to go down, while Franklin texted him that he was in a hotel with no signal. At the time, I believed it. I always believed. I have always been good at understanding, justifying, waiting. Because to love, for me, has always been this, to endure. I endured the fatigue. I endured the absence. I endured the forgotten birthdays with an, sorry love. It was the rush. I endured the lack of a congratulations on the day I finished my second college. I put up with it when he didn't show up at my graduation because he missed his flight. I endured when we sold the car I liked so much to pay off a debt that, now I know, wasn't even mine. All of this flashed through my head like a scratched movie, but now I watched it from another angle. Now I knew. He knew that every I need to travel, every I'm going to work late, every this week is going to be pulled, was a door he opened to another life, a life where I didn't exist, and the cruelest. It's just that I kept believing for years, because his silence taught me to be silent, because from being left in the background so much, I started to think that this was normal. What a wedding it was like that. That love was something before the altar, and that after it was just coexistence. I found myself folding clothes alone in the laundry, preparing his lunchboxes with notes he never answered, trying to keep the house clean, the sun raised, the faith standing, all by herself, and yet I felt loved. I felt like a woman. But now, with all that evidence in front of me, I understood. I wasn't a wife. I was an employee without a salary. I was the audience of a show in which the main actress was another. And the worst, it's just that I was an accomplice in this, because I kept silent, because I accepted, because I confused abandonment with routine. And do you know what hurt the most? Remember the Sundays when he said he was too tired to go out with me, but he went out with her. Remembering the ring he gave me in our 20 years of marriage. Now I know he bought 2 of the same, one for me and another for her. Remember the day I surprised him in his office, and he was furious. I thought it was stress, but today I know. It should have been there. And thinking about all this made me feel ashamed of myself, to have given so much, to have erased myself so much, of having stopped being a woman to be just the base, only the foundation. And yet, he preferred another. He preferred the lie. He preferred youth. He preferred betrayal. I wondered if he had ever thought of all that I had given up for us. Because there were so many dreams swallowed, so many desires left for later, so many times when I wanted to leave, but I stayed. I stayed for Elijah. I stayed around the house. I stayed for the family name. Now I understand. I didn't stay for love. I was afraid. Fear of finding out what, deep down, I always knew. But now there was no way to unsee. There was no way to go back. And what was yet to come? It was going to show me that the hole was even deeper. Because if until now I thought Franklin had only betrayed me as a woman, I was going to find out that he also cheated on me as a mother. Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that your family has had a secret hidden for more than a decade, and that this secret has a name, a face, and age? I went up to the bedroom and closed the door slowly, as if I was trying not to wake up the pain that was already wide awake inside me. I turned off the light. I closed the curtains. I lay down with the clothes on my back and leaned my face against the cold pillow. There was nothing else to do that night. What I felt had no name. It wasn't just sadness, nor just anger. It was mourning, a living mourning. The kind of pain that doesn't scream, suffocates. And perhaps this is the hardest thing to explain to those who have never lived. The day we die inside. But it is still standing. Outside, the house was full. Relatives from outside, godmothers, godparents, friends began to arrive. The wedding would be the next day, in the garden that I myself helped to plant. But there, inside that dark room, I was just a body without a soul. The woman I once was, the devoted wife, the optimistic mother, the dreamer, they had all died there, in the face of the evidence my son gave me. And no one knew, no one listened, no one noticed. I heard voices downstairs, laughs, glasses clinking, people praising the decoration. And, in the middle of that, his voice, Franklin, speaking loudly as always, playing the perfect host, laughing as if he hadn't ended his own family. He always had that talent. Deceive, manipulate, control. It was as if he already knew that no one would suspect it, as if the truth were a minor detail, hidden among the flowers and the fake smiles. I didn't eat anything all day. I didn't even feel thirsty. It was as if my body had shut down. I curled up in bed, hugged the pillow, and let the tears come. I didn't cry out loud. I have never been one for scandal. My cries have always been like this, inside, in silence. A silence that screams inside and that no one hears. And in that dark, between sobs and memories, I thought about leaving, to take a suitcase, to leave without saying anything, to disappear. But something held me back. It was Elijah. It was his look, his pain, the confidence he had given me when he showed me everything. It wasn't just for me. It was for him, by the two of us, for everything that still deserved to be saved, even if in ruins. I remember putting my hand on my chest and thinking, how can a broken heart still beat? But it did. Slowly, painful, but it hit. And it was there that I realized who was still alive, wounded, but alive, and that maybe that was precisely why I needed to stay, to show that it's not just those who scream who feel pain. Sometimes, silence is the biggest cry there is. There is a phrase that I have carried with me since that day, and if you have come here listening to me, maybe it also makes sense to you. Stay with me until the end of this story, because it is there, in the end, that pain is transformed into strength, and truth becomes justice. The dawn passed slowly, as if time was afraid to walk. The light from the corridor passed under the door, and I remained there, motionless, hugging my pain. I didn't hear Franklin anymore. I didn't hear anything else. Just the sound of my own heart trying to understand how I let it all get there. And even without strength, a question began to grow inside me. It wasn't about him, nor about her. It was about me. Could I still look at them and not bow? Would I have the courage to do what needed to be done, even with a full house, the altar set up, and the whole world waiting for a happy ending? I still didn't know the answer. But the next morning, something inside me woke up, and along with the sun, The plan was born. Because I was going to wait. And at the right time, I was going to show everything, the way they least expected it. The next morning, even before the alarm clock went off, I was already up. It was still dark, but inside me something had already dawned. I went to the bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror gave me back a harsh image. Sunken eyes, swollen face, disheveled hair. I looked like I had aged 10 years in one night, but there was something different. There was firmness in his eyes. I was destroyed, yes, but standing. And sometimes just standing up is already a victory. I changed clothes calmly. I wore a blue blouse that Elijah gave me years ago when he passed the entrance exam, a pair of dark pants. I tied my hair. No makeup. I didn't want to hide what I felt. I wanted the world to see it. I left the room, went down the stairs with firm steps, and found my son standing at the foot of the stairs, waiting for me. He looked at me with a mixture of pain and admiration, and he said, "Mom, we can still cancel. A word from you is enough." I held his hand. I looked him in the eyes, and I answered with just 2 words. Not today. Today would be the day when everything would come to light. The day the masks would fall, and I needed to be ready. I called Vanessa, my sister. She lived 3 neighborhoods away. She was always the stronger of the 2 of us. A former police officer, now a private investigator, she was the one who helped Elijah organize everything. I arranged to meet her in a discreet cafe near the center. Franklin was still asleep. Madison, from what they said, was in the hall with the bridesmaids. And I was preparing for what would be the final chapter of a story that cost me my entire life. At the cafe, Vanessa was already waiting for me with a black briefcase and a flash drive. Everything Elijah discovered, and more. She had gained access to accounts, email exchanges, transfer records. There were copies of conversations between Franklin and Madison, reservations at roadside hotels, videos from security cameras. It was a dossier, a bomb ready to explode. I sat in front of her. She didn't say much. He just pushed the briefcase towards me. I opened it slowly. His hands no longer trembled. I was no longer the woman from the night before. I was different. As I leafed through those pages, I saw the confirmation of everything. The time he said he was traveling, he was with her. The money from our savings, invested in a ghost company in the name of a certain Brenda, who I later found out was the mother of his daughter. The girl, 15 years, blonde, similar to him. And it was at that moment, in the midst of all this avalanche of pain, that I found myself thinking, how can a man share so much fake love between so many different lives and still sleep peacefully? Did he really believe that he would never be discovered? Or did he just not care? You know, sometimes we spend our lives trying to understand others and forgets to protect himself. And if you've ever felt this abandonment disguised as coexistence, comment below with a, "I know how it is," or "I understand you." Because this story is not just mine. It is of many people who have already been left silent while supporting the house, the child, and their own deception. I left that cafe with the briefcase in my bag, the flash drive in the inside pocket of my jacket, and my head held high. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. I wasn't going to shout at the altar, nor create a scandal, but when the time came, everyone went to see it. Everyone would know. Now I just needed to do one last thing before the ceremony, something that would close this cycle with the dignity that he tried to take away from me. Because while they were getting ready to pretend before the altar, I was preparing to show the truth before everyone. Have you ever imagined what would happen if I exposed everything? There, at the moment they least expected it? Well, that's exactly what I started planning. The plan was born out of silence, and it grew right there, between the pain I didn't scream for and the dignity he never knew I had. It wasn't about crying anymore. It was about showing. To show the truth, naked and raw, the way it came. No anger, no shouting, no breaking anything. I just wanted each person at that ceremony to see with their own eyes the kind of man Franklin was, the kind of woman Madison chose to be, and the kind of mother I refused to let die inside me. Elijah helped me with everything. That complicity between us was now a wall. He suggested that we hire a sound and video team, saying that we wanted to surprise the bride and groom, a tribute with childhood photos, old videos, a family tribute before the vows. Madison loved the idea. Franklin said it was tacky, but let it go. They didn't know what was coming. Vanessa coordinated the rest. We found a trusted technician, someone who has worked with her in investigations. He agreed to edit the material, prepare the exhibition, and follow our instructions to the letter. The video that would be shown before the votes would have an introduction with sweet photos, but later, everything would change. Photos of motels, bank records, dates that matched, security camera footage, and finally, the DNA report. A simple copy, but one that carried the weight of a bomb. In the car, I left the complete folder with the financial documents, certified copies, signed evidence, and inside my bag, neatly folded, and with the pen already separated, were the divorce papers. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to scream. I was just going to deliver, in silence. You know, there was a time when Elijah asked me, "Mom, are you sure you want to do that at the altar?" And I replied, looking into his eyes, "If they weren't ashamed to betray me before God, I will not be afraid to show it in front of men." I spent the day calmly, calmer than I thought would be possible. I dressed with the same care as someone who goes to a wake, a dark blue dress without shine, hair up, clean face, like a widow who buries what is left of the past. But it wasn't Franklin that I was going to bury on that altar. It was the lie. Elijah also got dressed. Beautiful. Seriously. He didn't look like a groom that day. He looked like a man ready to bury a rotten love. And even with his face closed, there was dignity in every step. The ceremony would be at 4 p.m, in the garden of our house, the same garden that I planted with my own hands, where I buried seeds, hopes, and now he would bury the farce. The sun was already setting when the guests started arriving. The soft music, the smell of flowers, the chairs lined up, the altar decorated with the hydrangeas that I pruned myself. It looked like a movie scene. But behind the scenes, there was an earthquake ready to happen. Madison appeared surrounded by her bridesmaids, laughing as if the whole world was hers. Franklin was waiting for her next to the pastor, with that same cynical smile he had always used to convince others that he was a good man. But that day, even his smile would tremble. And it was then, that minutes before the video was shown, I looked around and thought, does anyone else suspect it? Does anyone else see what is about to happen? But no one saw it. Nobody knew. And that was exactly what made it all the more certain. Because when the truth comes, she will not ask for permission. She's going to break down all the doors. And you? Are you ready to watch the exact moment when everything falls apart? Because it's the next second that the altar becomes a stage, and the ceremony, a court. When Vanessa handed me the papers that afternoon, I wasn't sure what to expect. All I knew was that the evidence Elijah and she had gathered was the key to understanding what was really going on. I sat with her in the living room, while the sound of the party outside continued to echo through the walls of the house. But, deep down, the only thing that interested me was the truth. And the truth, as I was going to discover, was not just about betrayal of feelings, but something much deeper, something that affected everything I had achieved in life, with the hard work of a lifetime, with the dreams I built, and even the years I dedicated to that family. Vanessa, with the calm and precision she always had, began to show me the accounts, one by one, bank statements, credit card bills, everything carefully tracked. I didn't know where to start looking, but she guided me, as if she already knew exactly what I wanted to see. And I soon realized, Franklin wasn't just lying about travel, about the dinners he went to. He was looting what I spent years saving. In one of these statements, I found dozens of cash withdrawals, made with small amounts, always at odd hours, always at remote ATMs. When I looked closer, I realized that he had withdrawn large sums from our joint account, withdrawn money from our retirement, and even worse, forged my signature on loan documents to borrow money in our name, on terms I didn't even know existed. The amounts were not small. It was a systematic theft, a dismantling of everything the two of us had built together. I could hardly believe it, but the biggest surprise was to come. Vanessa then showed me something that made me swallow hard. Part of that money, the money he took from our account, from our retirement fund, had been transferred to an account in the name of a ghost company, Madison. Her name was there, registered with an address that I recognized from one of our trips. Madison had used Franklin's name to open that account. And the worst, she was, along with him, using the money that should be for our old age, for our future. That wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was a betrayal of life. They were stealing our security, my right to retirement, my trust, everything. That feeling of being buried alive came back with force. I remembered all the times I worked late, all the times I worked more hours than I should have to make sure the future was comfortable for both of us, for our son. But what Franklin did was more than betray a woman's heart. He stole my peace. He stole the future that I built with so much sweat. When you discover that even your signature has been used against you, when you see that you have been deceived in even the simplest of details, the feeling is not just one of pain, it is one of helplessness. I stood still, not knowing what to say. Vanessa was there, next to me, offering a silent shoulder, but I couldn't react. I didn't want to cry anymore. I no longer wanted to shed tears for something other than my choice. I was looking at a man who destroyed my life, but in that moment, I realized that I was no longer alone in this. I had Elijah, I had Vanessa, and mainly, I had my own desire to make it all stop. It was strange, but I was no longer angry. Anger had given way to resolution. I wasn't going to get lost in small feelings, in revenges that would only serve to dirty me. What I wanted now was justice. Not only justice for me, but for my son, for the man who still believed in people, who still loved his father and wanted to believe everything he said. As the images of everything he had done flashed before my eyes, something inside me lit up. It wasn't a fire of revenge. It wasn't a desperate cry. It was the light of truth. The truth needed no more words. She would speak for herself, and it would be in front of everyone, at the altar, where he thought it would all end, where he thought he could hide his double life and his lies forever. I looked at Vanessa and said, in the firmest voice I could find at that moment, "Let's finish this today. He will see who he really is." I looked at the clock. There were still a few hours to go until the ceremony. Time seemed to have slowed down, as if even the universe knew that this was the last chance to do the right thing, of not allowing that man to continue to destroy everything I had built with so much love and sacrifice. I knew what to do. I knew where my power was. And he knew, too, that the truth, when it is revealed, will destroy more than a marriage. It will destroy the mask he wore for years. It will destroy the lie he made me live. And there is no turning back. Today, he will pay. And when that happens, it will be in front of everyone. Because what Franklin did will not be forgiven. It will not be suppressed. He will not get away with it. It won't. I took the folder with the divorce papers and the flash drive with the evidence. Everything I needed was there. I went to the mirror again. I looked at the woman I saw reflected. She was strong. She was no longer the Cheryl who looked in the mirror years ago and wondered if she had done enough. No, she was a woman ready to rebuild her life, even if the price was the pain of seeing everything she loved crumble. I just didn't know yet how much he was prepared to lose, nor how much I was willing to expose. What I knew was that the moment was coming, and the revelations that would come would change everything. Vanessa looked at me with an expression that left no doubt that she had found something that even I didn't imagine possible. She was in front of the computer, her quick fingers running through pages and pages, in a silent, relentless search. When she looked at me, I felt a chill down my spine. It was not the kind of look of someone who found a simple betrayal. It was the look of someone who discovered a lie that cut deeper than I could bear. "Cheryl, you need to see that." She handed me an account statement. One of those that always go unnoticed, but when you look at it with the right eyes, they speak more than any words. It was a series of monthly payments. Nothing much at first glance, but as she explained to me, my soul was sinking. Every month since we bought our house, there were transfers, small deposits, and the recipients varied. One name that came up several times was that of Nicole Jenkins, a name I've never heard, but what came next left me breathless. Vanessa began to cross-reference information. She knew where to look. I had no idea what that meant, but she knew. It was then that she found an address, a house in Marietta, a small town near here. It was not only that. She found more, almost like one piece fitting into another. With the precision of a police investigation, Vanessa joined the dots. Franklin, for the past 15 years, has made steady payments to Nicole Jenkins. But it was not only that. He paid for a child's expenses as well, a daughter, a girl named Zoe who was 15. Zoe, exactly 9 months after one of his sales retreats. I froze. The air fled from my lungs, as if I had been punched. The pain took over me so fast that I couldn't even react. Zoe, his daughter, the daughter he hid from me all this time, the daughter he kept secret, supported with money from our house, our family, our effort. Zoe was the living ghost of our marriage, a child he never told me about, but whom he sustained and cared for, a daughter he had with another woman while telling me he was working, as he walked away from me with empty excuses. While he went out for his business meetings, they were actually times to live a double life. And there, in front of me, were the proofs, the account statement, the payment receipts, Nicole's address, Zoe's date of birth. Everything matched. Everything fitted. It was as if the truth had given me a direct blow to the chest. It wasn't just the fact that he cheated on me. It was the fact that he deceived me, built a parallel life, a hidden family, and left me out of everything. I loved him. I trusted him. And he saw me neither as a wife nor as a mother. I was just the woman he used to keep up appearances, while he was supporting his other family, away from my eyes. I felt as if I was being swallowed by a deep pain, impossible to measure. All those nights when he told me he needed to work, the trips he never explained properly, all the moments when he was busy and I was alone, taking care of everything. Now I knew why. Zoe. Zoe was the reason for everything. She was there. She was growing, and I didn't even know about her existence. And not only that, but the money he stole from both of us went to her, to keep that life a secret, to give her everything he didn't give me, everything I hoped would be ours. It was then that I realized the blow was much more than emotional. It was financial. It was physical. It was cool. He was supporting this secret daughter, a lifetime away from me. And me? I was here, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong, not knowing that the man I thought I knew had stolen from me in every way possible. With each new detail, my perception of everything I lived next to him faded a little more. The woman I was, the mother I tried to be, everything seemed to have been a game for him. I could no longer trust the memories I had of our life together. And it's hard to say, but in that moment, I knew I'd never be the same. There was no more room for illusion, for this idea that he could come back and be the husband I thought he was. He was never that man. The man I loved for all these years was an invention. The life we built together, a lie. He had another daughter, a parallel life, and I was the person he deceived all along. I spent my whole life investing in him, in marriage, in our family, and he hid the truth from me. I looked at Vanessa, who was there, quiet, watching me, waiting for a reaction. But what I felt was no longer just sadness. It was an icy indignation, a need to act. Because, in life, pain can even be unbearable, but it can also be the fuel for the biggest step you will take. And it was there, at that moment, with the evidence in my hands and the truth unfolding like a nightmare, that I made my decision. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me anymore. She would no longer be the woman who accepted everything in silence. I was going to fight, because one thing I knew now, his silence no longer belongs to me. And I just wondered, how many other lies does he still hide from me? The garage was cold, silent, except for the sound of papers being turned over and the muffled sighs of all of us. I never imagined that one day I would be there, in the corner of my own house, with the feeling that every piece of my life was being turned upside down. But here we were, me, Vanessa, and Elijah, surrounded by briefcases, photos, and documents. All the truth that Franklin had tried to hide from me, from us, was there, scattered on the table, ready to be revealed. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that was about to happen. The silence in the garage dragged on, heavy, as if even the house knew what was about to be destroyed. Franklin didn't know what awaited us. Madison didn't know. They thought they could continue with the charade, but that was the end of everything, the end of a lie built for years. "Mom, we're going to do it as cleanly as possible, right?" Elijah asked, his voice firm, but with the pain of someone who has suffered too much. I looked at him, feeling a tightness in my chest. It wasn't just because of Franklin's betrayal. It was for the son I loved, who was being dragged into something he never asked for. But he was right. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to fight. What I wanted was justice. And the only way to achieve that was to show the truth in a way that no one could ignore. No shouting, no scandal, only with the evidence. "Yes, dear, There will be no discussion. There will be no fight. Only the truth. My voice was firmer than I imagined. I was talking, but inside there was something in me that strengthened with every word I said. Vanessa, next to me, looked at the documents with a cold precision, as if she had been preparing the ground for this moment for a long time. She was, of all of us, the most balanced, and it was she who began to coordinate the plan. Okay, Cheryl, I'll take care of the audio and video. When the time comes, what will happen is that no one will be able to deny the truth. Everyone will see, without excuses, without quibbling. It will be clear. She was right. Everything had to be clear. The lie would be exposed in every detail, in the image that Franklin never wanted anyone to see. Elijah stepped back a bit, sat down at the table, and began to scribble something on a piece of paper. It was the speech he wanted to give, something short, simple, but direct. He knew that the pain he carried also had to be shown. It was not only the pain of a betrayed mother, but the pain of a son who saw everything crumble, who had to learn, the hard way, what it meant to live in the shadow of a lie. I watched for a moment as he wrote. I didn't know exactly what he was writing, but I knew that every word of his writing was a piece of what he had been holding inside for so long, and I could only hope that, in the end, it would all be released in the way he needed. That's when Vanessa looked at me and said, with that serious tone she always used when she was decided, "Cheryl, you have to sign. Divorce. Now." She was looking me in the eyes, as if she knew that at that moment there was no turning back. Not for me. Not for our family. I went to the table, took the pen, and signed the papers. The divorce was sealed. I didn't want that wedding anymore. Not the way he was. Franklin was no longer the man I loved. He was a stranger, a traitor, who made me believe that we were living a life that never existed. I kept the papers in my bag, as if I carried one last part of myself there, a part that was finally freeing itself from the weight he imposed on me. But at the same time, I knew that what came next would not only be liberation, it would be a struggle, a fight for everything we have built, for everything he has destroyed. And it would be at the altar, in that garden, that he would discover that the truth is impossible to hide. I looked at Elijah and saw his expression, determined, but also exhausted. He approached me, held my hand, and said to me in the calmest voice in the world, "Mom, today everything will change. Today he will see that we are no longer the family he thought he could manipulate." I didn't say anything. I just squeezed his hand tightly. I knew he was right, but at the same time, there was something in me that was still restless, something that told me that what would come next would not be easy. They were about to face not only the lies they had lived, but something they never expected. The truth could not be ignored, and the shame that would come would be even greater than the pain of betrayal. I paused for a moment, only to let the weight of it all fall inside me. It wasn't just about them. It was about us, about our dignity, about the truth that no longer had room to be hidden. The pain, the tears, the sacrifices, all of that would become a cry in the form of an image. And finally, everyone would see what they actually did. I know that this moment can stir many memories within you, just as it stirred me. What to do when you find out that the life you lived was a lie? Have you ever been through something like this? Have you ever seen someone try to hide the truth for so long? If you identify yourself, share it in the comments. I know many of us have stories that have never been said out loud, but for now, we had to be ready. The moment was coming, and what I knew was that there would be no more excuses. There would be no more denying it. And when he arrived, what would come next? You won't believe. The marriage started like any other. Soft music played in the background. Guests whispered, some wiping away tears with tissues. The garden was impeccable, with the flowers that I took care of so much, with the white chairs lined up like a silent army. The sunlight, soft as an embrace, illuminated everything. The scene was almost like a fairy tale if you didn't know what was about to happen, if you didn't know the truth that hung in the air, about to explode. Madison appeared at the end of the hallway, with that smile that annoyed me so much. She was radiant, as she always wanted to be seen. The perfect bride. I saw her come down, walking with that confidence that only those who hide secrets can have. She had everything under control, she believed. The impeccable makeup, the wedding dress as white as the purity she pretended to have. Her hands were clasped together, and she looked at Franklin with a twinkle in her eye, as if she had finally conquered the world. Franklin was there, in a suit, impeccable as ever, smiling like the man he believed to be the star of the show. He shook Elijah's hand at the altar, with a firmness that, for a second, reminded me of the old days. But I knew what he was. He was no longer the man who made promises to me. He was no longer the father Elijah wanted to believe he was. He was a weak, manipulative man who built his life on lies and betrayals. I was sitting in the front row, in the dark blue dress I had carefully chosen. It would be the last time I would be at that altar, in this house, being part of this farce. I held my purse with trembling hands, but with a firmness that only a woman who has been through so much suffering could have. Inside it were the documents, the divorce papers, the flash drive with all the evidence, and my final decision. No smile, no fake look. Nothing could take away what was stored there. Their fate, and mine too, was sealed. I looked discreetly at Elijah, who was standing next to me at the altar, his expression firm. He looked at me once, a small nod. Our gazes met for a moment, and it was as if the whole world disappeared. Only we knew what was about to happen. He was prepared, just like me. The tension was there, in the air, in our breathing. It was as if the entire space between us was charged with an electricity that no one else could feel. The celebrant began to speak, his words the same as in any other wedding ceremony. He talked about love, commitment, fidelity, as if those words had any value in that room, as if Franklin and Madison really believed them. But I knew what they didn't. It was all a farce, a stage where they were about to show off for the last time. And in the end, they would no longer be the actors. The truth, which had hitherto been hidden, would shine with all its strength. When the celebrant asked the question, the same question that all the bride and groom hear at that moment, the question that seems harmless but can change everything, the question that has the power to turn a wedding into something irreversible, he said, as if nothing special was about to happen. If anyone has anything against this union, speak now, or be silent. Forever, I felt the weight of that sentence on my chest. I knew that this was the moment where all the pain, all the lies, all the sacrifices were going to turn into something that no one could ignore anymore. The stage was set, and what would happen next would not be just a revelation. It would be a definite change. What I was going to do there was not just expose a lie. It was to show Franklin and Madison that they weren't in control, that their lies were going to end. I looked at Elijah again. His face was pale, but he didn't flinch. He was firm as I was. I knew he didn't want to see his father destroyed, but he also knew what needed to be done. He wasn't going to let the man he had called father continue to deceive him, or me, or anyone else. He knew I was doing what was necessary, and I, at that moment, did not feel angry. I didn't feel revenge. What I felt was a sense of peace, a peace that came from the certainty that I was doing the right thing. Those years of silence, of pain, of trying to fit in what didn't fit, were finally coming to an end, and somehow that gave me strength, because I was no longer going to be the woman who closed my eyes to reality. I was no longer going to pretend that everything was fine when the lie was in front of me. So when the celebrant popped the question, I knew it was my moment, and I prepared myself. At any moment, I would take off the mask. But before that, I wondered, how would Franklin react? Did he already know what was about to happen? Or did he still believe he could get away with it? I looked at him one last time, and saw, for a brief second, that even he knew he had no escape. The moment was coming, and what would come next, no one imagined. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the whole room on me. My every move seemed to echo in the tense silence that settled in that moment. The guests began to murmur, as if they still couldn't believe what was happening. Franklin tried to pull me down, holding my hand tightly, but I pulled it out of his. His gaze was desperate, but there was no more room for his fear. I knew what I had to do, and I was decided. Madison, standing next to him, widened her eyes, almost as if she had seen a ghost. She knew the end was near, but she didn't imagine it would be like that. I looked at them, both of them there, hoping that the ceremony would go on as if nothing was happening, as if this was just another perfect day, but it wasn't. Today, their perfection was going to crumble before everyone's eyes. I took the remote control out of my bag. The weight of it seemed greater than expected. The room was full of curious faces, some annoyed, some curious, And all, of course, waiting. They didn't know what was coming. They couldn't imagine. Only I knew. Only we, Elijah, Vanessa, and I, knew what was about to be shown. With a quick movement, I pressed the button, and it was as if time stopped. The big screen behind me began to glow, and the images began to emerge one by one. Photos of Franklin and Madison in hotels, smiling like there's no tomorrow. There was a lightness in the images, but at the same time, a weight of condemnation in each one of them. The audience began to murmur. The first images were recognized by some of the guests, but soon the surprise turned into confusion, then amazement. I saw people's faces change, what was once a nervous smile turning into disbelief. Franklin's gaze, once confident, was now filled with a fear he would never have imagined feeling. The images from security cameras appeared in sequence. Madison and Franklin walking into a hotel, laughing, talking. It was like a betrayal movie, but it was real. It was our life being exposed. The audience was in shock. Some tried to roll their eyes, but it was impossible to escape the truth that was being projected there. This was no longer a wedding. It was a trial, and I was finally getting a chance to be heard. The screen has changed. Messages. Text messages exchanged between Franklin and Madison, full of sweet words, empty promises, records of money transfers, the money I earned with so much effort, the money he stole from both of us. With each new slide, another layer of their lie was removed. The silence of the room was broken by the sound of someone whispering, and then, soon after, another whisper. People were in shock. Those who believed Franklin were now seeing the truth. The next slide showed the bank statement, the cash withdrawals, the fraudulent loans, and even worse, the forged signature, my own signature, used by him to borrow money, as if the whole life we have built meant nothing. I felt a mixture of anger and relief. It was hard to believe that he could have come this far. But now, no one else could ignore what he did. The weight was being lifted off my back, little by little, with each projected image. And then, the last slide appeared. The DNA report. The proof that neither he nor Madison could deny. Zoe, his secret daughter, of whom I had never known anything, but who was there, stamped on a cold, irrefutable document. The probability of paternity, 99.99%. His daughter, who he kept hidden, supported with the money that should be ours. The truth was there, naked, exposed, and finally I was seeing his reaction. Franklin began to scream, but no one heard him. He was lost in a sea of empty words, trying to justify the unjustifiable. He turned to Madison, and she tried to deny it, tried to make it seem like it was all a lie, but it wasn't. The truth was there, giant, immense, and there was no turning back. I was standing, looking at that screen, at the faces of everyone present, and I felt that what was happening was the culmination of everything I had experienced. For years, I was the invisible woman, the devoted wife, who believed in the words and promises of a man who had never seen me. Today, all of this was shattered before me, before everyone. It was not just a betrayal of the heart, it was a betrayal of life, of trust, of dignity. And now, it was being revealed to everyone, with images, with evidence that no one could dispute. The audience was in shock, but I stood my ground. There was nothing left to hide. There were no more words to say. What was being shown there was the only trial he would face, the only trial he could ever manipulate. The silence that followed was deafening. Franklin and Madison's marriage was crumbling in a second, and I knew it wasn't just their wedding. That was all. It was the life I built, the lies he made me live, the trust he broke. But what I knew, more than anything, was that from that moment on, there was no turning back. The truth, painful as it was now exposed, and no one could erase what was seen. I looked at Elijah, who was standing there next to me, firm, unflinching. He knew that from now on, nothing would be the same as before. The struggle we started together now became more than just a personal struggle. It was a fight for our dignity, for the truth that he tried to hide for so long. And now, I wonder, what will become of Franklin and Madison when the world sees what they did? What happens when the truth becomes irrefutable? The scene unfolding before me seemed to be out of a nightmare. Franklin, that man I had spent so many years trying to understand, that man I loved and trusted, was now running. But it was not a dignified race. It was not an escape of someone with the dignity that he could still save. He tripped over his own shoes, as if his own shame was holding him back. He looked back toward me, but I knew there would be no turning back for him. The escape was not going to save Franklin from anything. Madison, next to him, panicked. I could see the despair spreading across her face, a mask that suddenly fell off. The smile she wore until moments before, that smile of someone who believed she had won, disappeared. She tried to walk away, but it was too late. Vanessa, who had remained by my side until that moment, approached her with an undisturbed calm. She identified herself as a private investigator, with a quiet authority but as inescapable as the truth she had helped expose. Madison's eyes widened, but there was no more room for reaction. I knew what was going to come next, and I knew that justice was finally catching up with what, for so long, Franklin and Madison had tried to bury. It didn't take long for two police officers, who were present at the event, to approach with the same relentless calm as Vanessa. They had already been warned. They already knew what was coming. The handcuffs were placed on Madison with a precision that cut off any hope she might have had of escaping. I saw it all. I saw her hand shaking as the cops let her out. I saw the look of helplessness she gave Franklin. He, who before seemed to be trying to hide from everything that had happened, was now being escorted to the car, without dignity, without the power to react. It was as if the very weight of the lie he had carried for so long was finally sinking his shoulders. Madison's parents, who were there, watched the scene in absolute silence. They were so astonished, so broken, that they couldn't even react. They were seeing their daughter being taken away, but the tragedy there was not just her arrest. It was the destruction of the whole image they had built, of the whole future they had projected for her. Their faces were pale, expressionless, and at that moment, I knew that nothing, absolutely nothing, could give them back what they had lost. I was standing there, without raising my voice, but with a heavy heart. My son was by my side, as quiet as I was. I knew what he felt. I knew he wanted to say something, shout maybe, but he stood his ground. He didn't need words at that moment. What we were seeing there was not just a defeat for Franklin and Madison, but a victory for all of us. A victory for truth. A victory over the lie that had been fed for so long. And then, when the officers finally took Madison to the car, the audience, which until then had been in absolute silence, began to applaud. It was not an applause for the tragedy. It was not an applause for the suffering. It was applause for the courage to face the truth, for the courage to expose everything that was hidden. The sound of clapping reverberated through the house, and it was as if a wave of liberation had been felt by everyone there. They applauded not for Franklin's humiliation, not for Madison's arrest, but for the fact that the lie had been exposed, that finally someone had done the right thing. I felt a mixture of relief and grief, a contradictory sense of having finally put an end to a story that was built on deception and pain, but also the weight of knowing that somehow everyone's lives would be changed forever. Madison would not go back to who she was. Neither did Franklin. And I would never be the same either. The truth, as difficult as it was, could not be ignored. And as much as it hurt us, now it was the only thing that mattered. It was the only thing I had. I know many of you may be wondering how a woman can get to this point. How is it possible to deal with so much pain, with so many lies? I don't have all the answers. But if this story somehow helps you see that the truth always prevails, that the lie doesn't endure forever, then I know it was worth it. If you feel touched by this story, or have been through something similar, enjoy the video and subscribe here to the channel, because who knows, maybe someone needs to hear it too. But now the question remains, what will Franklin and Madison do next? Do they have any way to escape the truth? In the days that followed, the house was eerily quiet. I started to walk through it, as if it were a house that was no longer mine. The rooms, which had already been witnesses to so many moments, so many memories, were empty of meaning. What once seemed like a home was now an echo of the past. The sound of my footsteps in the hallways, the ticking of the clock in the living room. Everything seemed to resonate differently, as if the place itself had felt the weight of the truth that had finally come to light. The first night after the ceremony, I lay in bed, alone, as I never imagined I would be. I felt a deep pain, but it was no longer a pain of loss. It was a pain of liberation. I cried, yes, but it was different. I wasn't crying for the life I left behind. I was crying for the woman I finally realized I could be, a woman who no longer had to carry the weight of a lie. And although the emptiness was great, there was something curious, again, in that silence. A space to breathe, to finally find my peace. The next day was a sea of hands-on tasks. The divorce was processed quickly, with the irrefutable evidence I had gathered. Franklin lost everything. The house, what was left of the finances, and most importantly, the reputation. I don't know what is more painful, losing the trust of those we love the most, or seeing our own image, our history, being destroyed by our own mistakes. He will never be the same man again, and I knew he would carry the weight of that for the rest of his life. Madison wouldn't escape either. She would be judged, and not just legally. Everyone who knew her, everyone who was present that day, would see who she really was. But the truth is, I didn't want to worry about her anymore. Her life now was a reflection of the choices she made. Her life no longer had room in mine. I sat alone at the kitchen table, looking at the papers that had been left behind, the separation of property documents. Each word felt like a reminder of what had been destroyed. I made the decision to sell the house. This house, where we built a dream, where the past and the memories of so many years were rooted. It was hard to think of moving forward without her, but I knew that my future could not be built on the rubble of that place. It was not a matter of simply changing address. It was a matter of giving myself the chance to start over, to move away from what tied me to what was. The house, the walls that had witnessed so much, the garden that I had so lovingly cared for, all of this would now be left behind. I wasn't going to carry it anymore. I was no longer going to carry the weight of those memories. The past stayed there, on the walls of that house, and I was determined not to make it my present. When I talked about selling the house, Elijah looked at me with a sad but understanding smile. He was starting therapy, which was an important step for him. Seeing her son dealing with the emotional consequences of everything he went through made me understand that healing would not be easy, nor quick. He would also need time to reorganize his life, his beliefs. It was a new beginning for both of us, though it was hard to admit. I saw in him the same strength that I saw in myself. What we went through, what we saw, would shape us in ways we couldn't yet fully understand. I allowed myself to cry at times, to allow myself to feel the pain of what I lost. But I also allowed myself to be grateful for what I now knew was the key to moving forward. The peace I had sought so much had always been there, within my grasp, but I had to allow myself to let it in. Life had taught me, the hard way, that everything has its time and purpose. I could no longer fight against what I could not change. What I did, what we experienced, everything was part of the process. But now, the most important thing was that I was starting over. And it wasn't about finding happiness, it was about finding peace. And that, as simple as it was what I needed most. It was not a grandiose change, nor a new life full of glamour. It was just a chance to breathe again. I felt like someone who finally took the weights off my body and allowed myself to walk more lightly. I was still scared, yes, but he knew that the road ahead would be, in some ways, more true. Because when you face what's most painful, when you face the wounds and the scars, you start to realize that there's a strength in you that you didn't know existed. A force that allows you to walk, even when all you wanted to do was stop. And, thinking about it, peace was not in the house, or in the things I had. It was inside me. It was the certainty that, after everything that happened, I was still able to start over. Now I know that the biggest challenge is yet to come. How to rebuild what remains after everything that is gone. How to create something new when you've lost so much. The answer is right before me, and you'll see it soon. The letter arrived on an ordinary day, but for me, it was anything but ordinary. I was at home, as usual, rearranging some papers and trying to make everything as simple as possible. Deep down, time was passing in a quiet way, perhaps even more than I deserved, after everything we went through. But this letter, which came in the mail, brought a twist that I didn't expect. Nicole Jenkins, Zoe's mother, wrote with a warmth that, I confess, took me by surprise. She was grateful for the way everything had been handled, without hatred, without furious accusations, just a raw and painful truth. She told me, in her careful words, that Zoe, upon seeing the video that interrupted the wedding, had understood everything. What's more, Zoe wanted to meet Elijah. I wanted to know him as a brother. When I finished reading the letter, I felt a mixture of emotions that I could barely process. It was difficult for me. That name, Zoe, had been a bitter memory, a living proof of all that Franklin had done. And at the same time, it seemed to me something new, something I had never imagined. A hidden daughter, who Franklin had always kept apart, now calling me to something I wasn't sure how to handle. Elijah, my son, reacted quite differently. Without hesitation, he accepted. He had this ability to see the bright side of things, to open up to the new, to try to understand, even if the pain was still there. He immediately accepted the idea of meeting Zoe, of giving her the chance he felt she deserved. I was silent, holding the letter, thinking. My feelings were mixed. How could he? How could he simply accept the daughter he had with another woman, which he kept hidden? I was torn, and the decision was not easy. That's when the photo arrived with the letter. Nicole had attached a photo of Zoe, and as I looked at that image, something in me began to change. Zoe was just a girl. I saw her smiling sheepishly at the camera, and there was nothing wrong with her. I didn't see a ghost from the past. I saw a girl who, without guilt, was part of our history now. A story that I no longer wanted to carry with pain. It was not his fault. I could no longer blame her, or even see her as an extension of Franklin's mistake. She was someone who had not participated in the pain he had caused me, and it was not fair to treat her as part of that lie. Deep down, I knew I had to allow that to happen. To Elijah. For Zoe. For me. I had already lost so much, and I didn't want to live with the ghosts any more than it was. It was time to rebuild. It was time to allow things to move forward, no matter how difficult it was. The first meeting took place in a quiet way. We arranged to see each other in a small cafe in a nearby town, so that it would be something neutral, something without pressure. Zoe was more shy than I expected, but at the same time, she was sweet. She looked at Elijah with a nervous smile, as if she knew it wasn't easy, but she also knew it was something that had to happen. I realized then that this girl was not there to make us suffer more. She was there to help us heal. And at that moment, unintentionally, I also felt a sense of healing beginning to form within me. In the coming days, our meetings became more frequent. On Sundays, whenever we could, we met. Zoe began to open up more, to talk about her life, her dreams, as if that part of the past, which she had not even known, had finally dissolved. With each encounter, I felt that a new layer of pain was being removed from me. I saw more than a ghost. I saw a girl trying to find her place in the world, trying to understand her past and willing to move on. And I was also starting to move on. Gradually, with each encounter, with each word we exchanged, with the simple fact of being close to her, I began to feel that something in me was changing. I began to feel joy again. A joy without guilt, without resentment, but a genuine joy. Time seemed to be beginning to heal wounds that I didn't know were there. I was allowing this new relationship to be built, without comparisons, without judgments. It was a chance, a second chance, for both me and Zoe. I remember a moment, after one of those encounters, when I went to bed and looked at the ceiling, reflecting on everything. I asked myself, will I be able to move on with this? Will this fresh start be enough? And the truth is, even with all the pain, with all the weight that was still there, I knew that what really mattered was peace. The peace she finally felt coming from within. Something that, until that moment, seemed impossible. Zoe, in her sweet and simple way, showed me something very important. That not everything needs to be carried forever. Sometimes ghosts can be buried, and we can choose to look to the future without being stuck with what has hurt us. She was the chance for something new, something that could be good, without the baggage of guilt I feared. And then, as I looked at Zoe, as I saw the bond forming between her and Elijah, I knew that the most important thing was yet to come. But what would it be? What would the future look like for all of us, after everything that has happened? What would come after that? I didn't know it yet, but something told me that a new page was about to be turned. Would Zoe ultimately become a true part of our lives? Could this new chance at love, without guilt, be everything I hoped for? The doorbell rang unexpectedly that silent morning, and my heart somehow recognized the sound before I even opened the door. There was Franklin, thin, aged, his shoulders hunched as if he carried not only his age, but also all the shame and destruction he had caused. His eyes, once full of confidence and charm, were dull, tired, almost unrecognizable. He looked like a man who had lost not only his wife and son, but also his own soul. I watched him in silence, without letting emotion show. There was something in the air that didn't require words, something that spoke for both of us. He began to speak, hesitantly, every word measured, weighed with regret. "Cheryl, I know I don't deserve you to listen to me, but I need to try. I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did all that, why I was so selfish, so blind. I lost everything, and I know there are no excuses." His voice cracked at times, and he took a deep breath, trying to regain the breath and courage he seemed to lack. I remained motionless, watching, not intervening, knowing that my silence was more powerful than any hasty response. I needed to listen, not to relive the pain, but to close a page once and for all. He continued, explaining the therapy sessions, the meetings with professionals who tried to unravel the reason for his actions. He talked about how the years of lies had consumed him, how every lie about Madison, Zoe, and finances corroded him from the inside. It was as if every sentence that came out of his mouth was a confession not only to me, but to himself, a man who finally recognized the magnitude of his mistakes. I could feel the weight of his words, but also the lightness that began to emerge within me, as if the simple act of listening was a step towards my own freedom. As he spoke, I didn't feel angry. I didn't miss it. I felt no fear. I just watched. I remembered every moment, every decision that brought me here. The woman who was once consumed by pain, frustration, and a sense of betrayal now found herself in front of someone who had broken everything we had built, but who finally presented herself as someone diminished, vulnerable, human. There was no need to confront, to accuse, to shout. All the weight was in his eyes, in the hunched posture, in the faltering tone of his voice. The justice of life had been done. My peace now depended only on my choice. In a moment of silence, Franklin moved a little closer, but without encroaching on the space I carefully held. He seemed so fragile, so different from the man I knew 25 years ago. "Cheryl, I know that nothing can fix what I did, but if there is any chance of redemption, any chance of peace, I beg you to listen to me." I took a deep breath. Every word he said seemed to dissolve a part of the shadow he carried over my heart. But still, the decision was mine, not his. It was my freedom, my closure, my choice. And then I spoke, in a firm, serene way, as if I had rehearsed those words for years. "I forgive you, Franklin, but not by you. For me." There was no grudge in my voice. There were no screams. There were no tears. There was only clarity. I didn't need him anymore to validate my pain or my story. My forgiveness was not to alleviate his guilt. It was to ease my own heart, to allow me to breathe without the burden of anger that, for so long, had defined my life. It was a forgiveness that sealed my new beginning. Franklin lowered his head, and for the first time, I realized that he understood the weight of it. There were no words, just a silent acknowledgement of the end of something that was huge and devastating. I looked at him, at the man who destroyed so much, and I saw not an enemy, but someone who was also a victim of his own mistakes. But unlike him, I had the power to move forward. I had my life, my son, and now, a family rebuilt with Zoe. That meeting was not for him. It was for me, for the woman who finally allowed life to breathe again. With one last look, I closed the door. I felt the soft snap of the lock, and in that instant, something inside me broke free. The emptiness that once terrified me was now filled with a quiet, steady sense of peace. I was free from anger, free from fear, free from the shadows of the past. Franklin no longer had power over my mind, my heart, or my soul. He had lost everything, and I had found something he could never take away: my emotional freedom. I walked into the living room, where the sun came in through the windows in a quiet, warm manner. Each beam of light seemed to embrace the house, the new home that was beginning to be mine, no longer haunted by his lies. Elijah was with me, and I saw in his face a peace similar to mine, a reflection of our quiet and resilient reconstruction. Zoe, sweet and shy, was still learning to know the life she could have, but there was hope in her smile, hope that filled every corner of my heart. As I sat and watched the daylight, I thought of all the years, all the tears, all the nights I spent carrying the weight of a life that didn't really exist, all that had been necessary for me to get here, at this very moment, where peace was not just a word, but a sensation that crossed my body and mind. I took a deep breath, feeling the freedom I hadn't felt in a long time, and realized that I was finally ready for the next chapter of my life. And in the silence of my heart, a question whispered with curiosity and hope. What did life still have in store for me and my rebuilt family? What new stories, what new joys, what new connections were waiting to be discovered, now that we had finally left the past behind? Now, here I am, alone in my new home. The silence that once consumed me, that made me feel small, was transformed into a shelter. Every wall, every corner of this house was conquered with patience, with the mistakes and successes of a life that taught me, with pain, what really matters. I look out the window, and I see the hydrangeas that I have planted myself. They grow strong, with their vibrant and cheerful flowers, like my heart, which is now lighter. I write in my notebook, as I always have, a way to record my journey. The words that come out of me now are different. There is no longer that anguish, that pain. There is only the realization that, when everything was gone, I found myself. I was a wife, mother, base, shadow. I gave everything. And when I lost everything, I found myself. I didn't have to fight with screams anymore. I no longer had to get lost in the midst of anger or fear. My victory was not in the destruction of Franklin or the humiliation of Madison. My real victory was time. It was the truth that came to light and, above all, it was the dignity that I maintained throughout this journey. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way. And now, what once seemed like an immense weight has become my freedom. The house is mine alone. The name on the account is only mine. The silence I feared, which made me feel so empty, is now my refuge. A place where I can finally be who I am, without the burdens of the past. Sometimes, life needs to take everything from us to show us what we are really capable of finding. And it's amazing how, when we look back, we see how the pieces fit together. What was pain is now learning. What was anger is now forgiveness. I won, not because I knocked someone down, but because I managed to get back on my feet. The true righteousness that one can have, in the end, is the peace that comes from within. I know that many of you may be living through your own battles, either with the past or with what is yet to come. I want to thank each one of you who was here, following this story until the end. It is much more than just a story of betrayal and pain. It is a story of resilience, of new beginnings, of learning to forgive oneself and, above all, of learning to be strong, even when all seems lost. I know that if any of this resonated with you, if you've also experienced something similar or know someone who has gone through something like this story is for you too. If you identified yourself, leave a simple comment saying, "I understand," or "This story touched me." I would really like to know where you are watching from which city, because in the end, we are all in this process of finding our peace together. And if you liked the video, enjoy it, because this is like a hug that warms up and supports the channel to continue telling stories like this. And, of course, sign up. This is my invitation for a next coffee, for us to get together once again, in another episode, when the story continues. And before you leave, don't leave yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.